everyone, and thank you very much indeed for the webinar CPD talk on contract management in the construction industry in collaboration with the Professional Architect Council and the Mauritius Association of Architects. The industry guest speaker today is Vanita Hooloomann, and the panelist guest industry is Jason Redu, Nirupal Raghu, Kim Karan, Hannah Budan Ramjon, and Avinash Akia. So again, thank you everyone for giving back your time and really sharing your wisdom. So thank you very much indeed for that. Quickly on the agenda, we'll do a quick introduction. We'll have a quick award ceremony, and then survey. We'll have a part 1, part 2, part 3. So we'll try to engage as much as we can. So have a pen and pad handy as well as we go through the talk, and then we'll conclude at the end. So thank you, 128 of you registered today. Thanks a ton for all of you being here. Please email me at the end of the CPD talk at anil@cpdtalk.com, the one that you've got the email from, and just ping me with your feedback as well of how you found the CPD and send me your name for the certificate. Thank you to Vanita, Joy, Nirupa, Kim, Hannah, and Avinash, and the PSC team for giving back. Thanks a million, of course. So we're going to kick off with an award ceremony quickly with the Lifetime Achievement Award in Architecture. So it was, a collaboration between PSC and MAA to really give tribute to colleague, architecture colleague who's contributed since day one of the Professional Architect Council started. So we'll have a quick word from Berinda. So Berinda and Dharam, can I ask you to put your video on quickly for a few words? And I can ask also Alistair and Zulfi to put their video on. I know Dave's got the video on there. If I can ask Alistair and also Zulfi to put the camera on. Thank you very much. Off you go, a few words from you, Berinda, and then followed by Dharam, and then Divesh. So a few words from you, Berinda, on behalf of all colleagues.
So welcome everyone to this webinar on behalf of the Professional Architects Council and in collaboration, of course, with the MAA. So this is the last webinar for this year that we are organizing. And as we had planned since last year to have 4 webinars this year, we have been able to do that, which is thanks to collaboration with so many friends in the profession. And of course, the very dedicated support of Anil, who's here with us always to organize these webinars. This one is the end of the year webinar. We had wanted to do it physically, everybody present together at the end of the year, but unfortunately the conditions around the world doesn't allow it. So, but then there are positive points to having the webinar on Zoom, where so many people can really join in without any barriers, we could say. And so that's the good part about it. We are still meeting and we're still able to share our knowledge and give back, like we say, to the profession. A special welcome to Mr. Macbeth, Mr. Zulfi Karimji, and Mr. Balu. Like Anil was saying, we really want to appreciate our senior architects who have done so much for the profession, and we see examples of their architecture around the country. And this is our heritage, our Mauritian heritage, and I think we need to honor that. And at the same time, we would very much continue to how do you say that, to really gain from their experience and their knowledge of the profession. We'd like to hear from them, of course, slightly later, but this is the first time we are doing this. And like Anil said, it is since the start of the Professional Architects Council that these 3 are the first ones who got registered, and it's their privilege. Yeah. And we are very happy to have you with us.
Okay, thank you, Berinda. Thank you very much indeed. Can we also have a big round of applause for our PSC 001, PSC 002, and PSC 003? It's truly an honor, and we're all humbled to have all of you 3 today here. So can you use your little emoji for a massive thank you? And such an honor to have all 3 of you today with us. So thank you. There are a few words, please. Divesh, can I ask you to put your camera in as well? Before we ask a quick thank you. So there are a few words, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Anil, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's really indeed an honor to have the senior most members in the profession amongst us this evening for the last CPD session this year. It's really great. And then to see that we have already got 83 participants online, that's really great. And a few more will be joining us for the registration. So that's really great. And we hope to be able to carry on with this as it is, and it will still be a thing to have CPD on a regular basis for the profession. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Yoram, being the vice chairperson of PSC and Barinder being the chairperson of PSC. Devesh Fuwad being the president of MAA. Of course, the profession has gone through ups and downs this year and last year. And maybe just few words to our Lifetime Achievement Award nominees.
Thank you, Anil. Good evening, and I welcome you all to our final MAA-PAC collaborative CPD for the year. We are very excited to present this crucial topic to you, and we have a panel of highly esteemed colleagues from the building industry with a vast knowledge and experience to share with us. We have a busy evening ahead of us. We will kickstart with an award ceremony where we honor our first 3 registered architects. So a Lifetime Achievement Award in Architecture will be given to Alistair Macbeth, Zulfi Karimji, and Devanand Balu. I welcome and I congratulate our 3 guests of honor. A big thank you goes to Anil Rana for your usual support and your invaluable contribution to our CPD program. As Barinder has just mentioned, we have had a very successful year in terms of CPD webinars. So I thank you all for your attendance this evening, and I wish each and every one of you a happy festive season and all the very best for the coming year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Devesh. Just quickly, everyone, big round of applause again for an honor to have Zulfi, Alistair, and Dave today here. If you can, and I'm just going to just quickly ask a few words, but before we do that, let me just share the screen quickly as we, again, we're just trying to do everything in the new normal situation. So just making sure. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll just ask the first one, the PSC 001, Alistair Macbeth, maybe a few words from the heart. And of course, we'll be giving you a small tribute and we'll send an email to you. Obviously, we can't physically meet you right now, but maybe a few words, Alistair, being recognized by the PSC and the PSC Council and the MAA. A few words from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your kind words. I thank you most sincerely for this honour bestowed by the Professional Architects Council and the Mauritius Association of Architects. It's very humbling always to receive such an award, and even more so when it comes from architect colleagues. As far as I'm concerned, I'm only doing what I love. Architecture and design have been my life, my passion, my hobby, and my enjoyment. But I received this award not just for myself, but on behalf of all those who shared my passion over the years, both on the MAA and PAC committees, and Dev and Zulfi are, of course, 2 of those. But also in my architectural practice, both with my partner and my staff. What we achieve as architects requires teamwork, and it's been a pleasure for me to work with many other architects over the years, other consultants, and of course the best of the Mauritian construction industry to achieve some memorable successes within the hospitality, heritage, and residential projects. I thank you again, and I trust that you all gain as much pleasure out of architecture as I've been able to enjoy. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Alistair. Can we have a big round of applause, everyone? Once again, use your little emoji, and you can leave comments on the Q&A as well. And it's a great day and really a historic day as well for everyone. So just quickly, I'll just go back to the slide again, and then you'll see the screen coming up. And just making sure we've got the PSC 002, Zulfi Karimji, and of course, same certificate of Lifetime Achievement Award in Architecture, Zulfi Karimji, our 002 PSC. So just a few words there, Mr. Zulfi. from yourself. I know you're currently in London and you're joining us from there. So honor and privilege to have you. A few words from yourselves, Mr. Zulfi.
Thank you very much for this honor. It really is a great privilege. And I've been in practice since, I think, as Alistair said, early days in 1968, and intend to continue for a few years to come. And I would like to basically thank my whole team as Zach Associates for the unwavering support over the years. Retirement does not seem as rewarding, although I might take a few days off and go fishing and sailing. And this is one of my great pleasures. I enjoy working and I like to keep on going till I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And then we're just making sure we share screen again and we just go back to a tribute to Dave. So just bear with me on that one again and off we go. So this one is for Devan Balu, again, Lifetime Achievement, our PSC 003. So once again, big round of applause for Dave to join us as well. And, you know, great suit, blue suit there. My favorite color is blue, Dave. Great to see you on that as well. A few words from yourself, being in the industry for so long. A few words from yourself.
Okay, thank you, Anil, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. It gives me immense pleasure to receive this incredible Lifetime Achievement Award in architecture. Came to me at a bit of a shock. I'm grateful and thankful to the chairperson and council members of the Professional Architects Council and to the president and members of the Mauritius Association of Architects for the huge honor conferred upon me through this award. I take this opportunity to extend my congratulations to Alistair Macbeth and Zulfi Karimji, also recipient of the award. In receiving this award, I have a special thought to my ex-colleague architects of the Ministry of National Infrastructure, who, despite heavy constraint, produces wonderful work. At the Ministry of National Infrastructure, I spent my whole 36 years career in architecture, starting as architect in 1980 and retiring as Director of Architecture in 2016. Since then, I have been working as consultant at the Ministry of Finance, advising on procurement matters and public procurement, public-private partnership. I'm also happy to have been associated with the formation of the PAC in the 80s, both at the level of the MAA and at the level of government. I have served the MAA as secretary for many years, and I've also served the PAC in various positions. With these few words, I again thank the PAC and the MAA and wish them all the best in their future endeavors. Please do carry on with the excellent work you're doing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thank you. We're just right on time. So thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Zulfi. We're going to kickstart our CPD. So once again, truly humble on behalf of everyone to have you today. Truly historic moment to have all of you. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. And of course, anybody, if you want to share any comments on the Q&A tab, please do so. Thank you very much indeed again. And I'm sure we'll catch up at some point as an in-person event, whether that's going to be in a year or 2 years' time. I'm not too sure. So let's see how things unfold in the world. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll see you when we see you. We'll crack on. Can I ask you to switch off your video now? And I'm just going to go back to sharing the screen. Thank you. Okay, so the time is 6:45. We just are right on track right now. In terms of the panelists, we've got Mr. Jay Sorodou, who is the graduate as architect DPLG in Strasbourg, France in 1982 and worked 7 years in France before coming back to Mauritius in 1989. He completed his third mandate as council member of the PSC and handed over to Barenda. He's passionate about passing knowledge and experience to the next generation of architects, and is fully devoted to fulfill the goal of the PSC to empower young architects for a dedicated service to the nation and to encourage all the colleagues to keep learning and innovating. We've also got Nirupa Raghu, graduated in 1984. She worked at MPI, now MNI, for nearly 25 years, retired as a principal architect and joined Design Forum in 2010. Active member of MAA in the 1980s, chairperson of PSC in 1999 and 2000, truly remarkable. She's currently member of the PSC registration board. She has been involved in various types of projects ranging from hospital, education, sport project, as well as residential one. She also has a position in contract management using PPO and FIDIC condition of contract and in arbitration. Our third finalist is Avinash Akia, who is a registered professional civil engineer, CRP, currently assuming the role of contracts manager for Rem Greenacre and member of the Association of Project Manager UK and Project Management Institute, which is PMI. He has been in the past a member of the sectoral committee on construction with the HRDC. He has also construction experience of approximately 20 years and has handled both civil and building contract successfully over the years and currently leading the construction project of a clinic in QP. Last but not least, we've got Kim Karan, is the managing director and principal of Kim Consulting. He has more than 30 years of experience as consultant for major projects in the hotel and leisure sector, in the development of office building, industrial and warehousing, resi apartment, sport infrastructure. Kim holds an honor degree in civil engineering, master degree in engineering, project management. Kim is also a chartered structural engineer and a registered chartered engineer with the UK Council. He also a member of the Chartered Association for Project Management and the CIOB as well. And finally, is a chartered member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyor and locally registered engineer with the CRP and member of the IEM. And finally, we've got, of course, Hannah, and of course, Hannah Budun Ramjon is an experienced professional of the construction industry. She's a chartered member of the RICS. She's the holder of BSc QS and a master's degree in property studies from the University of Cape Town. She spent more than 9 years with GCC Limited in their QS department, where she honed her commercial skill working on 100 plus tender submission and pre-qualification under various contract and administration. She has recently joined Renault Ferna, one of the largest MEP subcontractor in Mauritius, as the new commercial manager for project and services, where she leads and manages tendering, QS procurement team, and oversees all contractual, financial, and commercial matter. So just quickly, we'll do a quick survey, of course, but we introduce our main guest industry speaker, Vanita Hooloomann, MSc, BSc, QS, MAPM, Chartered QS, and also professional quantity surveyors in Mauritius. Vanita Hooloomann is an executive director at RLB Hooloomann. She joined in 2013 and specializes in quantity surveying and cost management. Vanita has about 15 years of experience in project cost planning, financial monitoring, tender analysis, negotiation, contract administration, among others, and has provided services across multiple sectors in various countries, including Mauritius, UK, and the Middle East. Vanita is the member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, which is RICS, and also a member of the Association for Project Management with MAPM. And she's also the Professional Quantity Survey Council in Mauritius. And finally, she holds a master's in project management and a Bachelor of Science in quantity surveying from the University of Reading. So please join me in welcoming Vanita. And as we will just do a quick survey as well at the same time. So Vanita, can I ask you just to have your video on? And then if you can, of course, make sure we got your screen as well. So can we have a big round of applause for Vanita and all the panelists, please, for this presentation today, and thanking her for giving back her time. There's about 60 slides which we need to cover, so we'll do part one for the for 20 minutes, and then we'll go through. So just quickly, the screen is up there, and I'm just going to do a quick survey just to make sure we are all on the same page. So I'm going to launch a poll now, and you'll get a question there. The panelists can vote as well. Which procurement route are you most familiar with? It can be anywhere, so be good to know whether it's traditional procurement, design and build, construction management, or management contracting. So we'll give you a few seconds, at least kind of set context as well to Vanita as we go through. And please also use the Q&A tab as we get along. I know some of you have already mentioned, but yeah, so please, we will go through as well. So I've got a few seconds. Vanita, in your experience, what do you think the procurement route, which is currently being used mainly in Mauritius?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all the panelists and to Anil, the host, all the members and all the panelists. I think, Anil, to answer very shortly your question, I think in Mauritius, the traditional procurement is probably the most commonly used in Mauritius. Although if you look at different countries in the world, it's slightly different. In the UK, design and build is very popular, as is construction management, as you fully know yourself based on your experience here. So I think it really differs country to country, and also in terms of the different participants or stakeholders in the industry present and the type of project that you're undertaking.
Sure. So you'll see the survey there. A whopping 75% is traditional procurement. And of course, you will see the design and build come after, as well as the construction management, and then finally management contracting. So we will have more survey as we go along. So Vanita, thank you very much indeed, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Anil. Thank you for hosting this very interesting webinar, as everyone's been saying. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all the participants today to this webinar, all the panelists who are by my side this evening, and congratulations to Alistair, to Zulfi, and to Devanand on their Lifetime Achievement Awards. So we'll kick off this webinar on the topic of contracts management in the construction industry. And we will have it in 3 parts, as Anil has just mentioned. So, excuse me, Anil, I think my slides are not moving.
Just tap on the slide again and see if you can just go
yes,
right to left.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, apologies for this little glitch in IT at the beginning. So we will have this webinar in 3 parts. So the first part will be an overview of procurement routes and FIDIC contracts. And we will then have a panelist discussion, followed by part 2, which is an overview of tender documents and procedures. Part 3 will be contract administration itself, and a little closing note from myself before I hand over to Anil to close off. I would like just to stress at this point, the reason why I put this agenda on again, despite Anil's invitation, is just to highlight that contract management is not just interpretation of the FIDIC contract or the contract that you're using for a construction project. There is a lot that goes on before you reach that stage, which is very important to understand. And I think that's the reason why the focus is in 3 parts. We are starting from the very beginning, which is the procurement of a project, the preparation of the tender documents, before we actually get into the matter of the contract administration itself. So the first part will be the overview of the procurement routes and a brief description of some of the FIDIC contracts, or a general overview of them. Procurement routes, I think everyone has heard the word procurement, whether we are in an architect, an engineer, a quantity surveyor, a contractor, subcontractor, or a specialist. But what is procurement really? What do we all understand? Do we all understand procurement in the same way? So for me, and a general description of procurement is the overall process of acquiring a building or a project. What does that mean? It means that when the client has a project that he wants to get off the ground, how would he go about starting from a wish or an intent to actually getting it realized on site? In order to get to that, there's a number of procurement routes that you are faced with. And the choice of which procurement route you choose eventually dictates what management structure is put in place, what contractual arrangements follow, and what degree of risk the client is carrying and what degree of risk the contractor is carrying. And the 3 key issues that we need to consider in order to get to that choice is time, cost, and quality. I think this famous triangle of time, cost, and quality has been around for a long, long time. And the main point about that is that any procurement route cannot normally satisfy all of these with only one option. So consideration needs to be given to what is the client's list of priorities and what implications these priorities actually mean in terms of time, cost, and quality. And that will be what enables us to choose the best route for the client.
Vanita, just a quick one, Vanita. At the back of that iron triangle, I did prepare a quick survey for you just to have a bit of a context on which one of the iron triangle is paramount to client nowadays. We will all probably say speed, at the compromise, but I think it'd be nice to know from our architect colleague today and other colleague watching, which one of the iron triangle is paramount to client nowadays, and just kind of put on context in terms of you taking the presentation over. So we'll just give you a few seconds. But Vanita, as we wait for colleagues to vote, in your experience, how do you see client today? It's like, obviously speed is one of the key criteria, right?
I think most clients nowadays, they will tell you they want all of it. They want the project to finish on time, they want it to finish within budget, and they want the quality to be obviously the best quality that can be achieved. And it's always a very interesting discussion to explain to clients that it is quite difficult to achieve all of three. But I think based on your survey, as you're just showing on the screen, cost has become a little bit paramount, perhaps driven by the economic conditions surrounding us with COVID and all the financial difficulties, that it has become one of the major aspects of current projects and possibly projects to follow in the next few years.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Take it away. Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So choice of procurement routes, I think in the first survey that Anil touched on, these were the 4 that Anil had on the screen for you to vote on. So I presume most of the participants today are quite familiar with them. So traditional procurement is, as we all know, it's when the client engages a design team and then a contractor and a subcontractor gets engaged to build the design that has been put forward. Design and build is slightly different in so much that the client engages a contractor who will then employ his own designers to actually design the project and also build it. Construction management is perhaps the least well-known or less used nowadays. It's where a construction manager is employed to arrange the trade contracts and all the packages, but the packages and the trade contracts still have a direct contractual link with the client. Management contracting is where management contractors still employs the trade contracts and the client retains his design team. Management contracting is more popular on very complex and large projects, and it also depends on the capabilities of the contractors to be able to undertake that role. I've put here 2 additional choices of procurement, just because I think it might bring in some interesting discussions with the panel later on, particularly because we've got participants here from both private and public sectors. So if we look at framework agreements, these are generally a template contract which is set and agreed for a series of projects. So increasingly, there are some clients who have, say, a portfolio of projects and they would like to carry on working with the same team and carry on in the same direction. So in these particular cases, the framework agreements could be put in place, whereas where contractual conditions are already agreed and just carried on from project to project. PPPs, public-private partnership. I think there has been quite a lot of discussion about this. I think if you look at the UK, this has been very popular at some point in terms of public sector deliverables on major infrastructure projects, and increasingly in Mauritius, as the government is moving more and more towards infrastructure projects, this could become a very interesting topic for the years to come. PPP, in a sense, has different formulas, different options and scenarios that can be structured, but in essence, it's where the private sector could design, build, finance, and operate a public sector facility, which is decided by central or local government. So I'm not going to elaborate too much on these for now, just mention them, and I'm sure in the panelist discussion there will be quite a lot of the questions on them. So I will try to focus more on the first 4 procurement routes that are very popular in Mauritius, so that it gives the young architects here present today a good grounding in them. So if we start with the traditional procurement is relatively where competitive tenders are obtained based on a measured bills of quantities prepared using a full set of complete stage 4 tender drawings and specifications from the design team. I've chosen my words very carefully here in terms of full set of complete stage 4 tender drawings and specifications, because I think it's very, very important for architects and the design team to understand that in order for us to have a full measured bill of quantities to tender on, and for the traditional procurement to work, we really need a complete design. And unfortunately, time being against us, it is not always possible to have that. But that is the motto on which traditional procurement is built on or originates on. The contractor is then later appointed, and variations to design are priced according to the rates in the bills of quantities. So literally the traditional procurement would have a clear split between what is design and what is construction, because it rests on the principle that the design is complete and is given to the contractor to price, and the contractor will construct or build on that design. It is still the most widely used method of procurement, as we have seen in the survey. And over time, there has been some amendments introduced to it in order to fit this paradigm that design is not always complete to the level it should be to have a full bill of quantities, in which case the traditional procurement is then used in different forms, which are the first one being the firm bills of quantities, which I have just discussed. The second item here is based on approximate bills of quantities. This is where it is not possible to actually measure the bill of quantities in the accuracy that we would like. Therefore, we go on what is called approximate bills of quantities, and the quantities get readjusted later on. Based on drawings and specifications is where the design has not progressed to a point where quantities can be taken off, in which case the job is tendered on the basis of drawings and specifications which have been put forward. Schedule of rates is obviously where, again, we can't actually have bills of quantities, and therefore we use the drawings or the specifications available to build a schedule of rates to be able to later on convert that to a bill of quantities. What are why is the traditional approach so widely used? Is because obviously it has benefits in cost and quality. Generally, a traditional approach will give you a high level of cost certainty, and it is you're able to control the quality because the design is being done by the design team to the satisfaction of the clients. There are reviews, there are amendments that can be made, and the contractor will literally build to what is asked of him. But that comes at the expense of time, because that process takes time, and time is what we don't have. Every client wants their project to start as soon as possible, and often that is the reason why time plays against us, and we don't have the sufficient amount of time we need to make that process work as it should. So as I said here, there is a significant cost risk if insufficient design information is provided at tender stage. That's where we enter traditional procurement. And then during the construction on site, that's where variations come in, and projects tend to have the problem of being having to deal with cost overruns later on. Design and build. Design and build is based generally, it's a competitive tendering process again, but the tenders are obtained based on what is termed as employer's requirements. So in design and build context, there are two terminologies which are very important. It's the employer's requirements and the contractor's proposal. So the employer's requirements are generally a design intent from the design team that sets out the performance specifications and is generally supported by sketch drawings. The contractor would then submit a contractor's proposal, which would include detailed drawings and specifications, and generally a fixed lump sum price for the works. So the contractor here is being given an intent by the architect, which is what would be the client brief, and they would go about providing a technical solution as well as a financial solution for the project. The inherent responsibility that is put on the contractor in this instance is the term fit for purpose. If you look at all design and build contracts, this terminology comes back again and again. Fit for purpose. The expectation is that whatever the contractor proposes in terms of the design and price will be fit for the purpose that the employer has set out. The advantages of these are obviously you have a full use of the contractor's resources and expertise in terms of buildability. Again, a very important word, buildability. Buildability is what actually happens on site once you are at site handover. It's how the project progresses. There is a difference between, I think, what is being drawn on paper, drawn in 3D, and what actually happens in terms of workmanship on site, and in terms of what is actually being erected day by day and how the project progresses. Planning to achieve a better program. Of course, if the contractor is involved in the design, he has a better handle on how the program can progress eventually, because he's able to identify the issues in terms of design clashes, etc. Single line of responsibility for design, construction, and cost, which is probably the most attractive aspects of design and build. A coordination of design and construction. I think another important topic here, coordination of design and construction. Very often, to reach a fully coordinated set of design is what takes a lot of time. and by the contractor being responsible for it, there is an inherent coordination of design that can take place a bit more efficiently within a single organization, and the ability for both to progress in parallel. But of course, nothing is free. By doing that, there is a premium that the client would have to pay for transferring the risks to the contractor to be able to undertake all these responsibilities. So again, I think the advantages and disadvantages, I have dealt with them a little bit throughout what I've been saying so far, but just to summarize a little bit in a few words, traditional procurement, the advantages is that the client retains the control over the design process so that there is a quality that is being retained here. There's a direct reporting of the design team to the client so that they can ensure some kind of quality control. There is no built-in risk premium being paid to the contractor compared to design and build. The disadvantages of traditional procurement is that there is no one person responsible for both design and construction. So if there's an issue with the project eventually, the client has to go back to try and establish, is the problem with the design team? Is it an architectural problem? Is it an engineering problem? Is it a cost problem? Or is it a construction problem? Again, design needs to be developed as fully as possible, which often doesn't happen because of time constraints. On the other hand, design and build, if we look at the advantages of that, the single point of responsibility is very attractive, the early involvement of the contractor to help with buildability, and the cost certainty by being generally a lump sum contract. The disadvantages, of course, is the less control that the client would retain over quality and specification of the work, because the contractor is obviously mandated to carry out some of the design with the help, of course, with his own designers, but to his benefit. And of course, as I said just before, the contractor will build in a risk premium for that. I think that's a little bit a summary of traditional and design and build, which is probably the two most familiar procurement routes or methods that most of the participants on this call have indicated they're familiar with. So I'm just going to touch very briefly on construction management and management contracting, just to give everyone a brief indication of what they are. So if we start with construction management is where the construction manager, it's very important to understand that there is another professional that comes into play here. He's the construction manager, and he's employed as a consultant service to the client, provided on a fee basis, and he provides design and construction by other organizations. So here the design work is still being undertaken by the design team, which is engaged by the employer. The construction work is still being carried out by the different trade contractors. Each can be responsible for a defined work package. So here the project is split into work packages, and each trade contractor will have a direct link, a direct contractual link with the employer, and all these trade packages together constitute the total of the project. The construction manager himself is responsible for the organization and the planning of the construction work on site. So I think here the contractual links are very quite clear that the construction manager is again an additional consultant to the client, and all the trade contracts are direct to the client. What are the advantages here is construction work is more closely integrated into the management of the project. I think in construction management, what happens is that the construction manager has a knowledge of how construction actually takes place on site. So hence, there is a more coordinated approach in terms of the different trade packages and aligning that to the design which has been undertaken by the design team. There's a close liaison between the construction manager and a design manager, if there is on the client side from the design team, that helps to identify buildability issues much more quickly. Detailed design can continue in parallel to construction, and trade packages are usually let in succession as design of each is finished. So all the design is not necessarily finished at the start, they progress in parallel, and as each package becomes more and more developed, the construction manager will make sure that these packages are tendered, and this integration of design between these packages that are ongoing and the design team with that design manager, that's where the collaboration and integration happens. The contractual issues between the trade contractors and the client are addressed directly. So each trade contractor is directly employed with the client. So if there is any issues there, it's a direct link with the client to try and resolve matters. You would tell me what the disadvantages. Again, the client has all these trade contractors to deal with instead of one. So some clients generally could prefer to have just one single point of responsibility or contact, whereas here the client will have to be dealing with quite a few people in his team. Client's financial commitment is uncertain until the last final work package has been signed. So again, there is no cost certainty, from the very beginning. This is a progressive process that is quite ongoing as the project or the construction is ongoing. There is no single point of responsibility related to the delivery of the project, unlike design and build, where there is a single person that starts and delivers the project to the end. There is a greater role of the trade contractors, as you can imagine. The different specialists, they have a greater role to play in the completion of the whole project, but also in the coordination of their work with other packages. Here, there is no main contractor that is actually doing the whole work and the coordination. Each and every subcontractor or trade contractor has to take their responsibility in completing their part and also coordinating their work with packages that are before or after them. Management contracting. Very briefly again, what is management contracting and what are the main points here? Based on a competitively tendered fee, a management contractor is appointed to manage all the subcontracts required to complete the works within a program. The design here is completed by the design team in conjunction with the management contractor. He, the management contractor, will tender and place the orders for all the subcontracts. Generally, management contracting, they provide more of a management role on complex or large projects. I think one of the famous projects in London will be the Heathrow Terminal 5, if Anil remembers correctly, which was done by one of the very large management contracting firms here, where speed is of the essence and cost may be of secondary importance. Management contracting has benefits in time and quality at the expense of high levels of risk in relation to cost. Again, some of the advantages and disadvantages. If we look at that, the early start on site could be possible. This is one of the reasons why this route is generally chosen, because it allows an early start before most of the works are tendered. The design and construction can be integrated at an earlier stage. There is a single point of responsibility for the client, and the client has a control over the design and quality for the design team. Some of the disadvantages here, the lack of price certainty, because until all the subcontracts are tendered, the final price is probably not known. Management fee being payable as an additional cost to the management contractor is generally adds to the cost of the project. And what is very important here and is often the reason why this procurement route is not successful is when there is no clear definition of the services. It's very clear for the services to be provided by the management contractor to be defined. Otherwise, there is a situation where there is no clear roles and responsibilities allocated, and therefore the procurement is not successful in the end. I'm going to touch very briefly on public-private partnership because it's a very complex area. A PPP is not a one-stop solution. There are various scenarios, there are various structures, as I said, that are normally put in place, whether it's a financing structure, whether it's a management structure. There is always a decision about who actually funds the project, who actually operates the project, and what are the feasibility models behind recouping the investment on the project between the private and the public sector, and is very dependent on the project and the countries that it's being used in. But essentially, PPP is a form of public-private partnership, and as the name suggests, it's a marriage between the public and the private sector on procurement for program and provision of public services. It differs from privatization. It is not privatization in that the public sector retains a substantial role in the projects, either as the main purchaser of the service or as an essential enabler of the project. Under the most common form of PPP, the private sector would design, build, finance, and operate the build sector facility decided by the central or local government. Examples of where this particular route becomes quite useful is perhaps in large infrastructure projects like roads, where you have, for example, tolls, or rates in bigger countries where you would recoup the investment on it by the congestion charge or the tolls or the fees that is being used to use that road, that bridge. Public schools, prisons, care homes, and housing are other examples where this form of procurement could be quite successful if it's actually drafted properly and the structures are actually thought through before implementing them. Okay, I think I've touched a little bit on the first part of my part one, which was an overview of the different procurement routes alongside the four most common ones and two additional ones that I mentioned for discussion perhaps later. Choice of contracts, we're going to move into a general overview of the FIDIC suite of contracts. Contracts are widely used in the construction industry. There are different forms of contracts. To name, FIDIC is potentially perhaps the most popular across the world because it's an international contract that can be used in different countries. It's published in a number of languages, etc. But there are other contracts also that exist, which is JCT, GBCC, and NEC, and many others, which perhaps some of you have been familiar with. But today we only have time to touch on the main FIDIC contracts.
So Vanita, what I've done as well, Vanita, just a quick briefer from your side. So yeah, I've just launched a quick question on how many of you are familiar with the FIDIC suite of contract. So I think most of us have kind of voted. I'm just going to end the poll now and share the result with you. So 45% are familiar, 34 partly, and we've got still a whopping 20% are not familiar with the suite of contracts. So maybe you obviously, unfortunately, Vanita, you've got 5 minutes to cover the part 1 on the FIDIC. I know because I know the slide on FIDIC. You can talk for an hour on that. So maybe briefly 10 minutes on the FIDIC before we go on to the discussion.
Sure. As I said, this is not a FIDIC contract course or workshop. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what they are. And then this is obviously a discussion in itself. So first of all, FIDIC, let's do a definition of what FIDIC is for those that are not familiar with it. Fédération Internationale des Ingénieurs Conseils, or in English, if translated, I hope I've done it correctly, International Federation of Consulting Engineers. So why FIDIC? Why is FIDIC so popular? The aims of the FIDIC contract are to promote good project management, balanced in risk allocation, easily readable, used internationally because they do take into account both common and civil law. They use common terminology and a common format and structure. FIDIC tends to cover most of the major issues that need to be addressed under a construction contract, possibly why they are quite popular for engineering and building projects. Now, I've just given you on the right-hand side the 4 most popular ones, or perhaps that people are more familiar with, which is the Red Book, the Yellow Book, the Grey, and the Green Book, as they are commonly referred to. So we're just going to touch on those very quickly. So the different forms of the FIDIC contracts, we've got the Red Book here. The Red Book is used for engineering works and for major construction work, generally for works designed by the employer. It is a remeasurable contract, so the employer carries the risk on the price. The Yellow Book, it's the plant and design build contract for plant and design build works, where works are designed by the contractor based on performance specifications from the employer. And generally, these type of contracts tend to have a lump sum approach to them. Couple of the other ones, we've got the Silver Book, we've got the green form of contract, the short form, the Green Book, and also the design, build, and operate projects, which would probably I think it's the Gold Book as they refer to it, which is the most popular form that could be used for projects like the PPP, etc., like I've described before. So the Silver Book is the engineering, procurement, and construction contracts for turnkey projects. Turnkey is where you literally can, after the project is complete, you take the key, you open the door, you walk in, and you can operate that project. So these are very common for plant items like refinery or power plants where the project requires an immediate operation. It needs to be operational the day it's finished or the next day after delivery. The employer defines the design parameters and the contractor will submit technical proposals with lump sum contracts. There is no engineer in that contract and by definition, and all the risk lies with the contractor. The Green Book is the short form, as we refer to it commonly. It is used for minor works or repetitive works of low value. Generally, one of the criteria or a common standard would be for works that are less than $500,000. The design is by the employer, and it is only a 2-party contract. Again, it only refers to employer contractor. There is no mention of the engineer. Just as a visual guide, so I've got on a graph here, we've got contractor risk, employer risk, project cost, and employer design options. It just gives you a little idea on a scale how the Red, Yellow, and Silver Book fare in terms of those parameters of risk between employer and contractor and cost and design ownership. Right. Sorry, I've gone too quick on that one. So if we look at what are the roles of the main parties defined in the FIDIC contract, very briefly, I think the FIDIC contract is very, very long. To go into every detail, it would be counterproductive, but just to give a quick idea of the responsibilities of each party, the main ones, the employer pays the contractor for the works and ensure that he has the necessary financial arrangements in place, gives right of access to the site to the contractor. He appoints the engineer to administer the contract for the employer. This happens except in the silver, green, and gold books where there is the employer himself or his representative that administers the contract. The contractor, generally his responsibility in a sense would be to carry out the works as per the contract. The contract will define what are the contract documents in terms of specifications, drawings, bills of quantities or employees' requirements, and as per the quality defined and within the time frame, which is the time for completion, as per the program laid down in the contract. So if we look at here, it literally gives you a very brief indication of what are the contractual links. In some of the FIDIC contracts, the engineer is referred to. In some of them, it is not. It is a two-party contract. So what are the main roles or responsibilities of the engineer? Administer the contract on behalf of the employer, give instructions to the contractor for execution of the works and the contract. The engineer can issue variation orders, can instruct acceleration of works in case of slow progress. He notifies the commencement date. He certifies the works and issues the interim payment certificates. He reviews the contractor's claims and make determination of claims. Okay, Anil, I think I've covered the main, a very brief overview of the FIDIC contracts. I obviously will cover a little bit about the different roles and responsibilities and clauses of the FIDIC in the part 3 of this webinar. Thank you, and I'll hand over to your Q&A session with the panelists. You're on mute, Anil.
Mute. So thank you very much indeed, Vanita. Can I ask Jane, Nirupa, Kim, and Hannah and Avinash to join in quickly on the panel quickly as we get to the questions. So yeah, so you just wait for the videos to join in. And just quickly, there's a question which was asked earlier from an anonymous attendee. Vanita, I think this question goes to you. Do we use NEC, which is the NEC, the NEC engineering contract? From my experience, I haven't seen NEC here, but what's your experience?
Hey, I concur with you, Anil. I have used it in the UK, but I haven't seen it in Mauritius yet. It's a very different contract to FIDIC, as you know. There are different versions of NEC. There's NEC 3. I'm not sure how far they've gone down the line now, but it has been updated. But it was set up in the UK, as some of you may know, for a specific purpose. But I haven't seen it in Mauritius is the short answer.
All right, thank you. Anybody have used NEC from experience, maybe? Anybody, Kim and Jane, Avinash and Nirupa? No.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a question from Abby. I think I'll give that question to Nirupa. How much time are we giving architect to carry design development? So obviously the time is an issue here, but what's your experience in terms of, are we rushing to getting, I mean, I think Vanita talked about traditional contract where we take time to do things, but it's not really, the client get the funding straight away, we need to jump on it. And then before you know it, traditional contract become a bit of everything really. So Nirupa, what's your thought on that particular question?
Yeah, I think usually we do have that pressure in terms of time to complete our design. And it's a good thing that Vanita has highlighted that when we have a proper design, not only proper design, but proper detailing and proper specifications written, it impacts the process of construction, and it avoids variations during the contract, and there's less chances of cost overrun. So it's true that we would like to have more time for design and for the detailing rather. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nirupa. Kim, just quickly, in terms of your experience being a senior practitioner from an engineering point of view, what have you seen in terms of the changes of a traditional contract from when you started to where you are now? I mean, is client rushing into things now to get things done quickly, as Vanita mentioned, as speed and cost being the key factor, and quality get compromised after?
Obviously, you have the client's pressure is always on to get things moving earlier than previous years, and it goes on down to the method of production of drawings as well, and production of design, which was, if you want, in the years of Jay, there were boards and there were a lot of hand sketching and design. And then obviously in the industry itself, it has moved on to more technology and to more facilities with respect to computers and others. And clients are aware of these issues. The second thing is the cost value of money, which is impact on the head of the financial point of view. And nowadays, it's all the projects of cost driven, and people want to make profit earlier and to get the money earlier and to get the return on projects earlier. So the pressure is always on. Secondly, there was also bad planning. For example, a lot of government projects, you'll find it is only when there's a lot of public pressure or something, like an event coming nearer to the deadline, then you start moving on to projects. And this is where you had a lot of pressure from clients.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Mr. J, just quickly on part one on Vanita, on the different procurement route, what are you seeing nowadays, the trend from when you started to now? Is it time to maybe start having a hybrid procurement? Is traditional still relevant in Mauritius? And it kind of ties in with Nick Paturo's question, where Nick says, with local experience, what is the best scenario for fluid collaboration across design team and contractor?
Yeah, personally, this is my preferred route of procurement, because we've got control of the design, and we can develop the design to such an extent that we can go for tendering and so on. The pressure is always on producing good design, detailed design, as Vanita was saying. And from my experience, the big issue we have been dealing with is we don't have enough of coordination with engineers, structural engineers and M&E engineers, which impact a lot on the design. And then eventually with the quantity surveyor, because one is doing my preferred way of dealing with projects is to coordinate, to have time to look into the view and to work in collaboration with the QS to see whether there are things which have been omitted, missed, or something like that. But obviously, we don't have the time to do that. And the other procurement route, which I'm a bit familiar with, is the turnkey project, or sorry, the design and build project. Mm-hmm. But you've got, as Vanita has highlighted, some advantages, some pros and cons. But for me personally, I believe for normal projects, the traditional route is the preferred one. Obviously, for big projects like we are having in focus and so on, the smart cities, they are using different procurement systems. But generally, for me, this is the preferred procurement route.
Thank you, Mr. J. Avinash, just quickly, in terms of the different route of procurement, so you've got traditional and design and build kind of used in Mauritius. Bimal question goes on to say, does the client incur a marked difference in terms of cost of project? I'm presuming design and build will be more expensive than the traditional contract. What's your experience, Avinash, over the years?
Yeah, indeed, the design and build type of contract is more costly because obviously the contractor factors in a certain limit of risk. But in traditional procurement route and traditional contracts, what could be a major difference nowadays and what we've seen over the past years, especially with the with the labor laws in place are mostly legislated laws with regard from the tender and what happens during construction. As Vanita, in support of Vanita, I think the contract, we've got a part 1, we've got a part 2 as well. And obviously the marked differences can come when there are truly legislated increases that happens. We've seen in 2019, the 22% increase in labor, which has spanned over 3 years. I think this year is the last increase. Of course, you've got inflationary increases. So yeah, it does happen. And of course, you've got different types of contracts, like the fixed contracts. It all depends on the conditions, and it all depends on how you drawn the contract, and also how you see the part 2 of the conditions as well. I think Vanita, the conditions of contract comes as well with the part 1 and part 2, and most of the time the other increases that are not factored in that tender stage comes due to other increases that happen during the courses of the project, and that's discussed and agreed with all parties of the job.
All right, thank you, Avinash. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Hannah, just a quick one. Touching on FIDIC, on the latter part of Vanita's part 1 presentation, we've got 2 more parts to go. When we come to FIDIC, it does get very emotional, as well as there's a bit of frustration if a contractor is issuing letter in terms of notices and things like that. Avinash and yourself are from a contracting background. Why is it so important that all of us need to be aware of our contractual right, but working in collaboration? Because the moment a letter goes out, everybody starts jumping around, say, oh, the contractor's trying to claim some money here. But it's not about that, is it? It's about trying to obviously preserve your rights, by the same time working collaboratively with the client. So maybe a few words on that, Hannah, having worked for GCC and now Renault, maybe a few words from that.
Yeah, so Anil, indeed, people get very emotional when we start issuing contractual letters or clauses. The clauses are mentioned whenever a letter is written. But I think I've always said that a contract is a tool. There are conditions of contract set out in there. That there are particular conditions. There are clarifications that have been negotiated and put in place. And it actually makes life easier for everybody that there is a contract there. And that the rules of the game is set out, and it is a big responsibility of whoever is doing the administration, the management of the contract, to make sure that each party is delivering, but each party is also their rights are being respected. So of course there needs to be you cannot use it cannot become something that is conflictual, but always give a phone call out of courtesy. That's what I always tell anyone who's writing a letter, because indeed when we receive a letter and it's saying, I'm claiming you X amount of money, I'm claiming you X amount of extra days, it can be taken personally, but it shouldn't be. But the contract is there to protect everybody's rights. So the contractor knows their rights, they will try to enforce it. The clients know their rights. There are obligations that all the parties and the stakeholders, including the designers, etc., that they have to deliver. And so if an architect who is doing the contract administration, he needs to deal fairly, be very unbiased, and proceed when he gets any kind of claim or anything on his table, in his inbox. He approaches it in a very detached manner, and he looks at things in a very fair and reasonable way, and gives clear reasons for why he's taking X decisions. And if he can back up, if he can say, I've looked at this and that, and this is what I believe is the most the best way to proceed, I think everybody would just say, all right, you've given us a fair hearing, and we agree with that. So indeed, FIDIC can be very complicated sometimes, especially if you have many particular conditions that have been amended and twisted and you know. But yeah, you need to bring it back to basics.
All right, thank you very much indeed. As I said, I want to keep most of our discussion at the end because that's where it's going to get interesting. Vanita, take part 2 away. Let's kick off with part 2. I know we've got a few questions which we'll respond at the end as well, but let's get to part 2 because the part 3 is also very interesting. So if you can share your screen, Vanita, and then if I can ask everyone to switch off the video and we'll go back to part 2, please keep submitting your questions as we get Vanita to share the screen for on the document and procedure. And I'm just gonna, and Avinash, if you can obviously also switch off your video, please. Thank you very much. I'm just gonna launch a quick survey here as well. I just let the kind of the audience know, as we said, the procedure, how many of you are familiar with tender or bidding documents? So again, quickly, be honest, it's all about learning today. It's all about learning new things, which obviously Vanita and the panelists are sharing, and give you a few more seconds before we go. So I'm just gonna give you a few more seconds before we kick off and just stop poll now. So here we go. I'm gonna share the result now. 75% are familiar. However, we've got a still very relevant, a quarter of the audience are not so familiar. So Vanita, take it away.
Okay, well, it's very interesting to see that 3/4 of the participants here are very familiar with what I call tender documents or bidding documents and procedures, etc. So it will be very interesting to see what I say afterwards, whether every one of us are aligned. But again, I think it is an important part of the webinar today because before we get into the clauses, like the panelists have been mentioning, the general conditions, the particular conditions, it is also important to understand that there are other documents in that contract which play an equally important part in what constitutes a construction contract at the end. So here I'm going to just run through a brief overview of the tender documents and the procedures that are undertaken to get to that step before we get to a stage where we can put a contract together. I think it's important to understand that if a tender process is done correctly, it is usually those tender documents that eventually become the construction contract, or the contract documents, as we call it. There should be minor amendments between the two sets of documents generally, if the process runs smoothly and as it should be. So if I'm going to just, for argument's sake here, and to be able to illustrate the process of tender or bidding documents, I'm going to assume that we're on a traditional procurement route using the FIDIC Red Book, which is probably the most common procurement and route and the most common contract being used on quite a few projects in Mauritius. So what could we typically expect to form part of what we would call the main contract documents? Let's start with the main package, which is the main contract. So we would have the instruction to tenderers, where we would give the contract an indication of what are the instructions to follow for this tender in terms of what the job is about, what are the documents he has to submit, how he has to submit it, what are the conditions for dealing with errors, what are the conditions in terms of submission, etc. The letter of tender and the appendix to tender are two documents of the FIDIC contract that are required to be filled in by the contractor, because that is eventually what becomes his offer. And a contract relies on two principles, which is an offer and acceptance thereof. So the offer is generally encompassed in these two documents, which is the letter of tender and the appendix to tender from the contractor. Then we have, obviously, what everyone's been talking about is the conditions of contract. The conditions of contract in the FIDIC itself, you have the contract agreement, which is the agreement that gets signed by the contractor and the employer. So the employer would accept the offer, which is encompassed in the letter of tender.
Okay. Just making sure. Can you hear us?
Which is the general preliminaries and requirements, specification of materials and workmanship for architectural, and both structural works. Nowadays, we are also seeing a big push towards green credentials in buildings in the light of what is happening in the world in terms of sustainability. So that is also an important parameter that gets brought in nowadays, and the preambles which are accompanying the bills of quantities. The other aspect would be the tender drawings, which is what we've been talking in the beginning about the design team producing a full set of tender drawings, and the QS will prepare the bills of quantities. So that was generally what will form part of that tender that would go out to the main contractor to get a price for the project, which eventually will translate into a construction contract. The difference with the design and build route would be that the specification and drawing sections are replaced by what is called the employer's requirement, and the bills of quantities are replaced by the contractor's proposals. The particular conditions, as I mentioned before, these are generally amendments to the general conditions, and we'll touch through those a little bit later on. Right, here I've just extracted for everyone's benefit on the call. These are from the FIDIC contract itself. What would be the general forms of what a letter of tender would look like, what an appendix to tender would look like. So the letter of tender would be where the contractor would actually propose his offer. So he would actually write down his offer in there, and this would become what the employer would eventually accept. The appendix to tender deals with the important clauses. If you look at the items are referred to there, and you've got the sub clauses. So these are the main points of the general conditions of contract that gets highlighted in this offer basis. So you've got the main items here, which are the name of the employer, the contractor's name, the engineer's name, the time for completion, the defects notification period, how the communication will take place, where the electronic transmissions will be allowed, what would be the governing law of the contract, what would be the time for access to the site, how much performance security is required, what would be the hours of work, the delay damages and the maximum amount of delay damages, if there are provisional sums, how these are dealt with. So these are the very important points of the big submission, the big FIDIC contract, the general conditions that follow in terms of the main items that need to be agreed between the two parties, and that's why they are summarized in these tables in the letter of tender. There are other adjustments that take place, I think, as some of you mentioned, in cost, in terms of legislation, etc., which is what clause 13.8 deals with. You've got items such as the advance payment, the timings of the repayment of advance payments, retention monies, limits on retention money, interim amount of payment certificates, currencies of payment, submission of insurances, and the dispute adjudication board if it's applicable. And if you've got any sectional completion on the project, these are also defined at the very end here. So that's a little bit the main document that constitutes an offer from the contractor. And what will happen afterwards is there is a contract agreement that gets signed between the two parties, and the two parties to the contract agreement would be the employer and the contractor. And if you look at the agreement, it is very clear that it mentions the very general terms such as who the employer is, who the contractor will be, what are the works being undertaken here. And if you look at number 2, this is the priority of the contract document. So they are listed in order of priority, which means that the first document takes precedence over the second. So the FIDIC Red Book allows for a letter of acceptance to be issued before the contract is actually signed. So you will find that on many projects in Mauritius, what happens would be that the contractor would be appointed for the works on the basis of a letter of acceptance, which is the LOA, including memoranda, which is a little bit what Hannah discussed, where there are amendments to the general conditions of contract. Any terms and conditions that need to be agreed between the two parties will be summarized there, whether it's in terms of qualifications or clarifications to the tender. And then you'd have the letter of tender itself that's submitted by the contractor with his appendix to tender, the addenda, if there is any, and then the particular conditions that are amending the general conditions of the FIDIC itself, the specifications, which would be from both architect and engineering sides, the drawings, and lastly, the bills of quantities. Bills of quantities, I think if some of you architects haven't seen them before, I've just given you a screenshot of my own bill of quantities, just a little idea so that you get a little understanding of what it is. I'm sure you must have seen them in a number of projects you've done. So I've got the general requirements and preliminaries, which is obviously a document that gets put into the tender, which would be detailing what are the administrative and operational aspects that are expected from the contractor to have on site for the smooth running of the project. I've just given a few examples of what they take care of. It's things like power, water, for the works, temporary roads, accesses, etc. Then we've got the preambles, which are generally the accompany what we call the bills of quantities in terms of the descriptions that are put in the bills of quantities, if there is any ambiguity into what they actually include or how these should be measured or what the measurements are deemed to be included in there. So the preambles would give an idea of what we expect them to have included in terms of that item in the quantity and in the rates. And then what would happen is would have obviously these bills of quantities will get collated into a main summary, as we call it, which obviously would form the basis of a price or an offer from the contractor, taking into account the conditions of contract, taking into account all the specifications and drawings and the bills of quantities. The general conditions of the FIDIC, I've extracted them from the Red Book, just to show you a little bit all the areas that the FIDIC deals with. So if you look at a FIDIC Red Book contract, the first section are the descriptions. So general provisions will be the descriptions of the different terminology that is being used in the FIDIC contract. Then you have a section about the employer, and this section will deal with what are the responsibilities of the employer, a little bit what I touched on in the first part of this presentation in terms of giving access to the contractor, who will act for the employer in terms of personnel who can act on his behalf, and also a responsibility on the employer to have the proper financial arrangements in place to pay the contractor, and how claims from the employer, etc., will be instructed upon, and who will and it flows on to the number 3 section, which would be the engineer, in terms of defining what the engineer's duties are, what is his authority, the engineer's instructions, how they will take place, and determinations of any engineer's decisions, We then go on to section 4, which is about the contractor himself, what are his general obligations, and deals with a couple of aspects like how, in what format and what type of performance security is required from him, who are his representatives, and what is his responsibilities in terms of his subcontractors, setting out, cooperation, etc. And it goes on in quite some detail about different aspects, rights of way, access roads, water, power, progress report, security of his site, and his operations on site. Section 5 deals with an important part of the contract, which is the nominated subcontractors. Like I explained before, so far we have looked at what the main contract is, but very often the main contractor will have a number of nominated subcontractors working under him, which would be subcontractors. These are packages that the client usually would want to be would like to retain the process of tendering. So the client will tender those packages, and he will choose the subcontractor that he might want to appoint for different work packages, and he will ask the main contractor to take them on board, and they are taken on board as nominated subcontractors. So these nominated subcontractors, this section details a little bit their definition. If the main contractor has any objection to this nomination, how he should go about it, how payments should be made, evidence of payments, and if there is any determination and assignment of these subcontract, how he should go about it. Like Hannah said previously, these are all conditions that are written in the contract to facilitate the management of the contract between all the parties, because it lays out clearly the rules and the conditions that are to be followed in different scenarios.
And Vanita, it's like a Bible, really. It's like a Bible. It's the Bible of the project, and there's no argument. So everything is clear and set. Everybody knows what they price for, and that way everybody just moves on with the construction project.
Correct. And I think it's we don't have time today, Anil, to run through every single line item in the FIDIC, but just to show you how it's structured as general conditions to start off with, in terms of establishing roles and responsibilities to everyone, to the parties to the contract, and then we go on to amend those if we need to suit the condition of our project or the jurisdiction we're working on or the parties involved. Staff and labor, I won't go into too much detail, but these are more from a contractual point of view. I think the contractors here will have a very good understanding of that. And we go on about clauses that deal with number 8 would deal with commencement. This is all about programming of works, everything that goes with program, which is time for completion, program delays, and how to deal with them. The tests, all the quality aspects is dealt with number 9, which are the tests to be completed. 10 deals about taking over. So once the project is finished, how does the employer take over or take over the building or the completion of the building? And after that completion, what happens about any snags or defects that are obviously become apparent after construction? These are dealt with very clearly in the clause number 11. And clause number 12, 13, and 14 are what is the commercial or financial aspect of the FIDIC contract, being how the measurements are done, how variations get instructed and priced, the contract price itself, what constitutes the contract price, how to apply for advance payment, how to apply for interim payments, how payments should be made, what is retention money, when are the different certificates supposed to be issued, what are the currencies of payment, etc. The last few sections of the general conditions, obviously number 15 deals with termination by employers. So every contract allows both parties to terminate on certain terms and conditions. And these are laid out in 15 and clause 15 and clause 16. Clause 15 being termination by the employer and clause 16 being suspension or termination by the contractor. And then we have the important aspect of risk. I think I touched on risk in the procurement section of the webinar. And here again, the FIDIC takes into account this risk about the risk and allocation of responsibilities. So it details a little bit about that. And insurance, so number 18 is about insurance. It's one of the aspects on the appendix to the tender that we mentioned. It sets out clearly who should have the insurance for the works. So if there is any issues on the construction site in terms of damage, losing works in terms of fire or injury to people or personnel, it is very clearly laid out whose responsibility it is and how these should be dealt with. Force majeure is a very interesting one, being in a pandemic. This is one of the aspects that had come into play at the very start of the COVID pandemic. I think it's one of the clauses that had remained very silent for a long time in Mauritius until COVID came about. And this is where we started using that clause a bit more. It defines what a force majeure is and how to deal with it, whether it's in terms of notices to be given, it's in terms of the impact it has on the time and the cost of the contract and how to go about it. Claims and disputes is one of the important aspects of construction contracts or any contract in generally. And we have a section in this webinar a little bit more to go into the different claims or dispute resolution methods. So again, here, the FIDIC contract allows you to obviously use one of those clauses to decide how you wish to deal with dispute should they arise under your contract. There's a few other items I've added here, which is some of the things that we have been dealing with or looking at on top of the general conditions. Taxation sometimes is one of those that needs to be spelled out. Regulations, immigration laws, value taxes, etc. These are little things that get added on depending on which country you're dealing with, what type of project you're dealing with, and what are the parties to the contract. Okay, I think that was a little bit lengthy, but I think it was important to show how well structured the FIDIC contract in general conditions are. Now, once we've prepared those tender documents and they've gone out for the contractor to price, just want to touch a little bit on the tender procedure itself and how tenders get returned very quickly. So generally, we do ask in Mauritius that tenders have a tender security with them. This is just as an incentive that is put in place to make sure that when a contractor tenders, he doesn't withdraw his tender. So this actually secures the client in terms of knowing that the person who's bidding for the project is genuine and he's interested, and he's not just obviously losing the consultant's team time or the client's time because he's just trying to get a project that he's not capable of doing or has other issues with. What happens in terms of a tender when the tender is received? Of course, we check the documents, any queries that are attached and any addendums or addenda that has been issued. We check the tender documents to make sure they are complete and they have been completed as per the prescribed instructions to tenderers. We also look at tender return, whether we have to have tenders nowadays. It used to be, I think, the normal way of dealing with tenders was for hard copies, but with the pandemic, we have had to adapt to potentially soft copy submissions. And again, we've got very clear instructions on how tenders are to be returned, labeled, and what the submission content should look like. Public procurement is quite different also. They have different conditions, which we should not forget. There are much stricter rules and regulations there. How errors are going to be adjusted. So if we have a financial or arithmetical error in the tenders, it's set out in the instructions how that's going to be adjusted, so it's clear for everyone. We usually ask in the tender returns that there is a statement of resources and experience from the party bidding to try and understand whether they have the capability to undertake the job. There's also an opportunity there. It's important to know to submit alternative time and designs, and there's generally a section there that deals with how this should be done and what will be the process if ever an alternative time or design is received. Qualifications to tenders is a part that is becoming more and more common nowadays. It is what becomes the commercial negotiation between the consulting team and the contractor in terms of what issues or queries they would like to raise and what needs to be adjusted. A criteria for awards. So in a tender document, it's important for the tender to spell out quite clearly how the award will be made. Will it be made on the basis of technical abilities? Is it cost which is most important? Is it cost only? Is it a mixture of cost and technical ability? So there are different aspects here, whether it's the program. So there's a different criteria that is set out. Tender validity, like anything in life, nothing is permanent, everything is temporary. So even a tender submitted is temporary. So it has a validity, whether it's a month, whether it's 3 months. So that needs to be spelled out quite clearly, and any guarantees that need to come with that. Generally,
Vanita,
what happens?
Vanita,
yeah?
Sorry about that. Just a quick one on tender validity. Due to the increase in dollars, are you finding contractors reducing the period of tender validity? What's the experience? What are you experiencing? Just kind of sharing with the audience.
Sure, exactly that. Like I said, nothing is permanent, everything is temporary. So in a volatile market like the one we're having now with logistical issues in terms of sourcing materials, there is obviously tenders that are coming back with shorter time because they are not able to secure the supply chain at the same price for longer. So a lot of tender validities are coming back to be quite short, as 15 days to 30 days even, on items which are highly volatile or where the fluctuation of the currency in terms of the dollar is enormous and is too much of a risk for a supplier or contractor to take upon himself to guarantee you that this material will be available in 3 months' time at the same price. So again, these are things that vary with the current market conditions. Tender expenses and documents are usually prepared at the expense of the bidder. And as I said, this is there is an acceptance of the tender that eventually gets made by the client and gets incorporated into what becomes a construction contract. Right, now I'm going to have a quick session on the aspects, apart from the general conditions and the particular conditions of the contract. This is perhaps the second part of a contract document that is very important, which is the specifications, the tender drawings, and the bills of quantities. So the priority of documents is, as I showed you before on that contract agreement, we have to note that whatever the design team is producing gets incorporated in the contract, because the specification from the architect, from the engineer, the tender drawings from the architect and the structural engineer, they get converted to what becomes contract drawings. And as I said, if the traditional procurement route works very, very well, those tender drawings become contract drawings. The specifications of materials and of workmanship of both architectural and engineering works become the contract version. And that's why it's very important to have a detailed coordinated set that supports the bills of quantities, because if the discrepancy between these three documents is reduced to the bare minimum, we should have very successful construction projects on our hand, and we should all be very happy, because at the end we'll have a happy client, no project overrun and no time overrun. So it will make life much easier for all of us. Bills of quantities very, very quickly, because being from a QS background myself, I have to touch on those very quickly. Bills of quantities are prepared nowadays. We are using I'm not sure about every QS practice in Mauritius, but we tend to follow the latest RICS rules of measurement, which is currently the new rules of measurement for building works. The bills of quantities are prepared. They're usually, as I said, to be read with the preambles. The pricing basis is normally set. The FIDIC contract in itself is a remeasurable contract in the general conditions, but these can be amended to become lump sum if required, depending on the project requirements itself. The cost control, I think that's an important point that has been mentioned by some of the other panelists before, is very dependent on how accurate and complete the design information is at the tender stage. Once the tender has been received, the price comes back, and this is where it becomes very, very interesting, because this is where we have a happy client or a very angry client or a very upset or disappointed client if the price doesn't come back as per his budget or what his expectations were. And how do we manage that? How do we manage that is that whatever we send to the contractor or to the tenderers to price, consulting quantities, consulting or PQSs as we call them. So on the cost management side, on the team that sits with the client, we also undertake a pricing of the same documents that is being sent out using current market rates and prices. And the way we do that is that the bills of quantities are split as per the rules of measurement, which are substructures, superstructure, finishes, fittings, external works. We've got the provisional prime cost sums. So we also price them alongside the market in order to understand how these tenders would look like when they come back. So it is an estimate, an updated estimate of the project cost after design development is complete at stage 4 prior to construction. So that document is a very important one because it actually gives you an indication of what the market is going to price, and also an indication before you engage into construction, whether you have a cost certainty, whether there are overruns possible on the project, and any changes to design at this stage obviously would result in variations at construction stage, because if the design is ongoing beyond the point of award of contract, there is no doubt that this will translate literally into what we call variations at construction stage, and therefore they cause generally cost overruns. The tender evaluation process and the tender report itself is what the client would be looking for, or what the project team will be looking for in order to award the contract. So I'll just spend one slide on that just to explain what the tender report is, because it's very often, I think, as cost managers or quantity surveyors, we do ask the design team for their input on this, and sometimes maybe they might not understand why we are asking them for this input. But it's very important when we are receiving a tender. There has been a lot of work put in by the contractors or the subcontractors or the suppliers into submitting a tender, and there's various sections to it. It's not just the commercial aspect, it's also the technical aspect of things. So often we get in the submissions, there is capability statements, there is organigrams of the organization, there is CVs of the personnel, there is quite a lot of detail about who the organization is, how well positioned they are to be undertaking this project. And also what you would get is fact sheets about different materials being used, different products being used, which is very important because it's a learning process between what we call the design team sitting with the client and the contracting team on the other side who have the knowledge of buildability. Again, I come back on this point of buildability, where this integration is what makes projects and design challenging and interesting. So the tenders are usually recorded in a tender opening form in the presence of generally the quantity surveyor, the project manager, and the client or one of his representatives. The technical review is normally undertaken by the design team, and the financial review will be undertaken by the cost management team. The program and methodology are reviewed by the project manager. The tenders are examined. The tender dossiers are usually checked to make sure they are complete and they comply with the tender dossier. So if there are any arithmetical errors, those are reported and addressed in line with the instruction to tenderers. Any of the qualifications are reviewed, and these negotiations are held with the tenderers to assess the technical and financial impact of these qualifications on the final offer. Technical qualifications are very important. Again, I stress the point because I think architects and engineers have an important part to play in this process, because these technical qualifications need to be aligned to the specifications that were originally required by the design team. These are often alternative materials or specifications for approval, And this is where the contractor has the opportunity, or the supplier has the opportunity, to bring in his expertise or new products or any items that he may see fit to propose. The financial qualifications, these often relate to the conditions of contract as has been amended by the particular conditions. These can cover items such as payment terms or items that have not been priced. Technically compliant offers are analyzed. In terms of rates, prices, they are benchmarked against the most competitive offer that has been received, but also against the market offer, to gain an understanding whether the prices that have been obtained are in line with what is expected of the market. Preliminaries and general requirements are benchmarked against the budget and market rates. The criteria for award, again, we touched on those. The marking of the tender dossier is very important before we shortlist the potential tenderers to be interviewed. And this is where it's a global effort from the team. The tender interviews are held to clarify any technical and financial queries, as well as any tender qualifications. The evaluated revised offers are recorded, and the budget is reconciled, and a recommendation is for award is made based on the criteria that established in the tender dossier. At this stage, the qualifications need to be resolved and agreed so that the final letter of tender, which is the final offer from the contractor to be accepted by the client, is correctly received in a due form that can be accepted for contract purposes. I'll touch very briefly because we've been talking a lot about main contract, and the subcontractors are not to be forgotten in this process, because there's a number of packages that go down the nomination route. If we assume again the traditional procurement using the FIDIC Red Book, once the main contract has been procured, there are several packages that are left as provisional sums and can be nominated to the main contract. And here the contract that would apply would be the conditions of subcontract for construction of building and engineering work designed by the employer, which is published by, again, the FIDIC. And here again, you have particular conditions of subcontract, which are amendments to what are the general conditions of the subcontract. So the principle is the same. Ideally, I think what has been the effort that has been made in the past is to have a main contract and a subcontract that are aligned, so that all the parties to the contract, whether it's the main contract or the subcontractor, carry the same levels of responsibility, risk, and obligations, etc. So again, the nominated subcontract documents comprise generally the same conditions, the same documents as the main contract, being an instruction, the subcontract agreement itself. Here we have the contractor's letter of acceptance in contrary to the employer's letter of acceptance. We have the letter of subcontractor's offer, and again, the same things, conditions of contract, specifications, drawings, and bills of quantities.
So Vanita, just quick one. I've got a quick survey to do, and I'll give you a breather as well, because you've been talking non-stop as well. So just quickly, I just want to quickly share and I think already, as you can see, I just want to know if you know the difference, or is there a difference between letter of acceptance and letter of intent? And I think many of us sometimes get confused with that, and I think Vanita is going to touch on it. So I think it'd be good to know if it's the same thing or is it different. And as you can see already, it's so descriptive that Vanita just touched on about the whole process. So yeah, thank you, Vanita, for that. I'm just going to end poll on this one and then share the result so 91% says yes, there's a difference, and 9% say there isn't a difference. So you can highlight us on that one. Please proceed on that one, Vanita.
Okay, well, very good. I'm very happy that it's well understood. I think we'll just touch on them very briefly. The letter of acceptance, generally referred to, abbreviated as the LOA, is issued prior to signature of the contract. And you would ask me why it differs, because a letter of LOA, FIDIC allows us to issue a letter of acceptance so that the contractor can be appointed and the construction work can start while the contract document is put into place. Not all contracts are the same. There are other contracts where the contract document itself has to be signed by both parties before contractor can start. So what is the LOA? It is the acceptance of the contractor's offer, which I've been discussing so far. And the main things that the LOA needs to highlight, because the LOA is not the contract itself. The contract will come, but the LOA will highlight some of the major items that need to be considered by both parties while they are engaging into this construction project together. So it would set out things like the price for the works. It will set out the description of the works to be undertaken. It will set out the commencement date, the program for the works, the rates and prices, the basis of the contract price. If there are any conditions of contract that have been amended, any qualifications submitted, and what is the result of those, what the negotiation has brought into play, and what will be the final stand of both parties in relation to those qualifications or amendments. Again, it will set out the priority of the contract documents to make sure that both parties understand which document takes precedence over the others. It will deal with aspects such as the performance, submission of a performance security, submission of the program of work, submission of the insurance cover notes, etc. And generally what the LOA tends to do is to try and put it out there that this becomes the contractual arrangement between the parties, which can be relied upon as would the contract document had it been in place. So obviously all previous correspondences between the parties, whether verbally, email, or other exchanges, are deemed to be replaced. They are deemed to be replaced by the terms and conditions that are within this LOA until such point that a formal agreement is signed and executed. The LOA becomes a binding contract, and I think that's where the main difference is between the LOA and the LOI, is that the LOA is the binding contract between the two parties until such time that the formal FIDIC Red Book or the other type, another FIDIC contract is put into place. So generally what happens is the LOA will sign, the employer, will sign the letter of acceptance and issue it to a contractor, and the contractor will just be requested to sign that he has received that letter and he agrees with the terms and conditions thereof. Why do we use the LOI? Because we already have the mechanism of LOA, etc. Why do we need the LOI would be the obvious question. What happens is sometimes a project is ready to start, but there may be conditions precedents, or there may be rules and regulations that have to be followed that are not necessarily here. A very common example is when we are due to receive the building permit, but it's pending for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, or there are certain approvals that are still required, in which case the employer and maybe the validity of the tender is going to expire soon. So what the employer would want to do is secure the contract until these approvals are in place for the construction works to actually start on site. So the LOI would be issued to give some reassurance to the contractor that the employer intends to proceed with him in a contract for the project works, but unfortunately he cannot go ahead at this stage because he still requires certain approvals which are very important before he can start. So what the LOI can allow a contractor to do would be perhaps to start mobilizing, put up his site establishment, maybe set out his boundaries. It's very minimal things that he can do, but he can actually get a head start so as not to impact on the overall completion date of the work and the program. The LOI will set out the contract price, which has already been established and will be agreed, and the program generally, which has already been agreed between the two parties. It possibly provides an opportunity because it could allow the contractor to submit a detailed program and for the contractor to relook with the design team at what eventually are the items critical on that program to enable the works to proceed in an efficient manner once that LOA is received. And what the LOI generally would say that if the project does not go ahead, the contractor will be reimbursed for what he has actually done. So the actual cost that has been undertaken to the point whether it's ever actually getting a site mobilization on site until he can start. But all these have to be obviously proven. They have to be actual costs that are justified. And what it does not permit generally is for any claiming loss of not getting the job or loss of profit and the like, because the intention of the employer at this stage is obviously to go into a construction contract with this party, but he is unable to do so because of certain constraints on a regulatory point of view, perhaps that are there. And the LOI would have a lapse date, like a tender validity. So it will say that the LOI will expire by a certain date and will be replaced by a letter of acceptance. And this letter is again signed by the employer, issued to the contractor, and the contractor is generally asked to acknowledge receipt thereof. So I think, despite perhaps quite a lengthy discussion on the general conditions of the FIDIC contract, which probably sets the tone for the next part of the discussion by giving that overview, I think this is generally, Anil, just a general overview of what constitute tender documents.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Vanita. If I can have the panelists quickly. Vanita, I know you've got part 1, part 2, part 3, but I think the part 3 will have to be postponed because I'm enjoying it so much. Part 1 and part 2, and part 3 is really, and we've got about 20 minutes to kind of conclude the webinar. So I think it's been a very comprehensive one. Let's take some panel discussion and let's get the question as well. Mr. Jay and Barinder, I think you agree that we could kind of do another webinar, and we'll have to schedule it in line with Vanita, because we've got part 3 and Vanita's got 20 more slides. I can see it here. And those slides are super comprehensive. So if Vanita continues at this trend, we'll be finishing at midnight. So, so I think for everyone, wisdom and knowledge, and not to get too saturated with contract, because we've already learned a lot in part 1 and part 2. Let's have some 20-minute discussion on what's been discussed, because I can see Arkham asking about, a bit more about nominated contract and domestic contract, which is in part 3 of Vanita talk. But I think we've set the scene for part 1 and part 2, which is fantastic. And what do you think, Jay and Barinder? We can schedule a part 3, obviously, if Vanita is okay with that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. In fact, when we're having our planning for this webinar, that is the thought that we already had, that this just might be too much for one webinar, and we might need to have a part 2 to it. So yeah. I'm for it. If Vanita can give us the time for that, I think that will be very helpful for all those who are participating in the webinar.
So let's take some question. I think, I don't know if Avinash is still here to put your video on, and also Hannah, just to have a quick discussion. And I think it'd be good to have everyone feedback. I will take all the questions before we conclude. And we just want to take all the questions. So Vanita, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just make sure I've got my screen sorted out for the question, and be good to get some feedback already, if you can, the participant, how you found it. But I don't want to rush Vanita in part 3, because there's so many valuable knowledge there that we can really do with another webinar. So, and I just want to make sure I've got the question there sorted. So, all right. So thank you, Vanita. Kim, just quickly on part 2. We've talked a lot in terms of, tender report, general condition of contract, letter of tender. Why is it important to have the right tender document? So for making sure it's a successful project. I mean, Vanita has covered all the appendix to tender, the contract agreement, but in your experience, sharing knowledge with everybody here, why is it paramount to have a good contract document?
The contract document, in fact, is writing the project in words and figures, taking the drawing and converting that, and it also the risk associated with the project. So there are a lot of aspects taking into consideration in the document, and it is from this document that normally contractors would try to consider the risk in any projects, and it gives also the interest and whether they're interested in going into the project or not. With all this, so the main aspect of tender and contracts basically is a risk that is being shared between the employer and the contractor. And if we don't give enough information in the tender at the tender stage, then this is where the problem arises at the construction stage. So to have a very well formulated tender document is a basis for a good construction.
Absolutely. And Nirupa, from your views, why is it so important for architects to understand the contract document in the first place? The tender document, the contract document, why is it so important to understand that before really embarking on the project? Because many a time, I mean, do we really read everything what's being kind of stipulated in the contract,
Yeah, I mean, it's good that all the architects are aware of the composition of the contract documents, so that they can integrate all information that they have, like to be able to integrate all their working drawings, proper detailing, proper specifications, submit all necessary documents and information that is to be integrated in the contract documents. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Avinash, being a main contractor, you've dealt with, 100 contracts, 100 projects. Once again, why is it so important for all parties to have a good grasp of the contract before really get embarked on the project? Just unmute yourself, Avinash, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Anil, thank you for the question. I think a well-drawn contract document sets the tone to have the right price on the job. With lack of clarity in the tender documentation, the contractor will tend to price a lot of risk, and that will really inflate the prices. So really having a well-drawn contract documentations in terms of documents, in terms of the price, in terms of specification, drawings, details are whilst we understand that not all details will be provided at tender, I think the contractor gets the right prices and eventually builds up the right price to submit to the client. So in a nutshell, I will say that a rightly drawn contract documents will give a price with very less risk and a more accurate price.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. J, just quick one in terms of the contract document, making sure you've got all the tender drawings in place. What would be your advice to all the young architects watching us today in terms of making sure they've got the relevant experience when it comes to the pre-con exercise?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said on the accuracy of drawings and document specifications. Generally, sometimes we tend to ignore the specification, use standard specifications. But I think more and more architects should devote time to writing their own specifications, especially for things like aluminum cladding and so on. Specific items where they want certain performance. I think it's time for them that we write our own specification. The game is clear, the rules of the game are clear, and one thing I would like to point out to young architects is, and it has been said in the discussion, sometimes frustration arises, and when you get letters, contractual letters, we feel not good about it. And I think also Hannah mentioned that the tender should be clear enough, because the contract documents, they spell out the rights and obligations of each party. And I think we should accept that, and each party does its job properly so that there is no frustration. And when the documents are clear, and I think the good thing on site is you know your responsibility, you know the risk, and also there's a good relationship with the contractor. I think this is important. There is no frustration, there is no animosity on site. And if you want a building to get through to be built according to what the client expects, I think this part of the job has to be really understood, that to have good relationship with the contractor, be fair in our approach as architect, we need to have accurate documents and detailed documents.
All right, thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to launch a quick survey, and it's to do with, obviously, I prepared that in line with the presentation. And the survey here is, do you think we should allow more time for coordination of drawings? Now, Avinash, while the participants are voting, I mean, why is it so important to have coordinated drawing? And I'll back on to Kim on that one. From a kind of, engineer's point of view, why is it so important to have coordinated drawing? Because surely it's a headache to have uncoordinated drawings and abortive work.
So obviously, coordinated drawings is what, in fact, if there are discrepancies between between drawings from architect engineers or any engineers, eventually, what will happen is that this will cause a lot of variations, and cause when you talk about variations due to design changes, it means also that the contractors sometimes may be entitled for preliminary cost, and the cost is not only in terms of execution of the variations, but also in terms of preliminaries that has to be paid to the contractors.
Yeah, Avinash, as you can see the survey there, 96% are saying we should really have more time for coordination. And I'm sure Jay and Nirupa will agree. But Avinash, from your perspective, why is it so of more importance, really?
Well, I do agree that we need to spend more time doing coordination. Kim has rightly said. Lack of coordination gives rise to a lot of preliminary costs, loss and expense claims, and so on and so forth. But the major part of it is good coordination limits the amount of reworks in a building. And that is not right. If proper coordination is done, this can be managed properly, and really the outcome of it is purely about quality and what is the end product going to be. If you have a lot poor coordination, I've done jobs where we have had very poor coordination in terms of the M&E, and the end products is really not nice to see, and that will also not be the client satisfaction. So I do agree that we need to spend more time doing coordination, but also that is also a very coordinated effort. All the stakeholders of the job, we are talking about responsibility and accountability nowadays in construction. So all the stakeholders now needs to be part and parcel of that discussion, and really make that process really conducive to the buildability, as Vanita has said a couple of times. So all these is one thing and one holistic package to the success of the project. So
thank you,
in a
Avinash.
nutshell, it is of essence.
Thank you, Mr. J and Nirupa. I'll start with Mr. J quickly on the coordination of drawings. I mean, do you really need more time? Is that because are we in a world where client is demanding and we've got reduced fees? So we'll just try to do as much as we can. So Mr. J, and then I'll piggyback on to Nirupa. Mr. J, what's your thought on that?
Yes, we do need more time, but we also need the early input of both structural engineer and M&E engineers, and even the quantity surveyor at an early stage of the project, because if they embark on the project at later stage, then there is quite a lot of work to be done. And to coordinate, especially M&E work, it takes time. Structural aspect is a bit less complicated, but in terms of M&E, more so if the equipment, the M&E engineers are not sure of the equipment going to be used and the space allocation needed. So that takes a lot of time, and this is generally what I'm in line with what Avinash was saying. Sometimes we end up with really high souls on building because of bad coordination.
Yeah, and Nirupa, we talked about that yesterday in our briefing. Is it time for architect to really take control of coordination?
Well, I totally agree with what is said, and I think obviously that it's to the architects to take control of coordination of drawings, because basically the design is theirs, and but really it's something, as Jay said, it's something that really takes a lot of time, and it's true that this happens a bit at the end of the design stage, where the tender documents are almost ready and the client is putting pressure to launch the tenders and so on. And often we just especially for M&E works, I have seen that we put a lot of provisional sums here and there. Things are not finalized, and we are not able to finalize the drawings. And at the end, it results in a lot of abortive works on site, lots of time overrun, and most of all for us architects, very anesthetic workmanship.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
Vanita, just quickly on your side, Vanita, we've got 5 minutes before we conclude. We will take all the question again in the next webinar, which could happen next year. But Vanita, from a chartered quantity surveyor, what's your advice in terms of us, in terms of having coordinated drawing to make everybody's life easier? Just unmute yourself, Vanita. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I think as we mentioned, I think the way traditional procurement was designed to work is effective. That is to have a coordinated set of design. This is where the client can retain the quality over his project, because that's where the design is completely coordinated and there's a quality aspect built into that. And then the construction that follows should be smooth in terms of the resultant cost and time. The job will very likely have a limited number of variations, therefore limit on the cost overruns, and also finish on time. I think an important part of the discussion today, I think it's my last slide where I've put, it's a team effort, it's collaboration, it's trust, it's teamwork that gets a project to a successful. I think if I share perhaps the last screen, I think that's my message. Trust, teamwork, collaboration, that's where success happens. It starts from the employer, which is the client. It filters down through to the design team, whether we have architects, engineers, to the QSs, the PMs, and the contract and the supply chain. It's a cascading effect.
Absolutely. I've got a few. Yeah, thank you, Vanita. I've got a few slides before we conclude, and then I'll take all the word of wisdom from you. So I'll just have a quick final round. I just want to share my slide quickly before we conclude on that note. So just bear with me, and we've got 5 minutes left. We want to keep it as a 2-hour CPD, of course, and then we will have to tackle part 3 next year. So just making sure I've got my video sorted. Yeah, fantastic. Can you see my screen, everyone? You can, and also the audience, if you can just put your hands up if you can see my screen. Fantastic. So I just want to share something with you, which Barinder wanted me to share. And it's the shrine of Abdu Baha located in Israel. So I'm just going to quickly make sure I've got the video shared with you here. And then just making sure we've got that sorted out in the screen. Here we go. Just making sure the sound as well is okay. And if you can hear the sound and everything else, please just give me a shout. Off we go. Yeah, thank you. So as you can see here, the design, I'm going to show you the screen. It's in completion. Probably Baranda will touch a few words at the end on that one. So you will see that's the design. It's in progress right now in Israel. It's truly complicated. And I just want to share with you in our last PEC MA webinar, we've got the winner of the RIB Sterling Prize 2021 is the winner. And the Royal Institute of British Architecture has named Kingston University London Townhouse, designed by Craft and Architect, as the winner of the 25th RIBA. So I'm just going to quickly share the screen with you again, just making sure you see the design as we conclude the webinar. So just bear with me, and then off we go again. Here we go. So I'm just going to share this with you. It's the winner of the 2021 RIBA Sterling Prize 2021. Here we go.
In a way, you may not feel like you're in a university building at all, that you're in a structure that
you can hear the images. If you can see the images and hear the sound, please give me a hands up. Thank you.
My name is Jared Carty. I'm a director of Craft and Architects, and we're sitting in the townhouse at Kingston University, which is a building we realised as a result of an RIBA competition in 2013. The building is surrounded on 3 sides by loggias, and that is an urban experience which connects the university back to the town. The university aspired to reveal the activities of the interior of the building to the wider public. I really love being in the foyer because you watch the buses going up and down, you see people on buses looking in, and they probably say to themselves, well, what goes on in there now? I must come back and have a look sometime.
For me, the thing that makes Townhouse really special is a combination of things. I suppose it's the light, it's the space, it's the views out from the building. It's quite soft, I think, actually, for a building that is predominantly concrete. It really lends itself to encounters between student to student, staff to student, and that's really important to us. That is the feel we were hoping to create with the building.
The ceiling has these specially made acoustic baffles which absorb sound. The wall panelling itself is kind of striated. In this building, you have 2 different aspects, a library and a dance faculty in the one space. From an acoustic point of view, you have to keep them apart, but from an ideological and a cultural point of view, you want to connect them. So that was the challenge of this project. We've designed the surrounds of the staircase so that they're overlooked, so people can actually work there by standing at the edges overlooking the staircase, because there's something really phenomenal about people watching. The building is a concrete building, it's a concrete frame. We have a thermally active system which allows the building to be cooled through that concrete. So not only is the concrete structural, but it's also environmental.
For me, the one word that epitomizes this building is open. It's very important to our students that they feel that this building is here for them and they can move into it and occupy it and use it the way that they want to.
The name Townhouse contains 2 aspects. It contains town, which has a civic dimension, and it contains house, which sends a sense of belonging, a sense of home. It's open and it's porous. It's a democratic space.
Okay, so thank you very much indeed for that one. And as we just conclude and get the final word of wisdom from our colleague here today, just making sure of the video. So, and then I think the one of the judge of the building, Norman Foster, speaking on behalf of the 2021 RIB Sterling Prize, he goes on to say that Kingston University Townhouse is a theatre for life, a warehouse of ideas. It seamlessly brings together student and town communities, creating a progressive new model for higher education, well deserving of international acclaim and attention. In this highly original work of architecture, quiet reading, loud performance, research and learning can delightfully coexist. That is no mystery. Education must be our future, and this must be the future of our education. So what an incredible year it has been with PSC, webinar number 1 in March, then number 2 in June, and then we had the September, October, part 1, part 2. Again, we are going to do part 1, part 2 as well. So thank you, everyone, and big round of applause for the PSC and MAA Council really to take great initiative in giving back to the profession relentlessly. So thank you for that one. As I conclude, I'd like to thank Vanita for her time in London right now, sharing all the knowledge and wisdom, which has been really, really informative and really thorough. And I think if I was not, I want to be a QS now. I mean, looking at that document. So, and the panelists, thank you to Jane, Rupa, Kim, Hannah, and Avinash. So from the bottom of our hearts and on behalf of all participants and MAPSC today, thanks a million for your invaluable times, everyone, and giving back for this truly informative webinar. And I just want to say, I've reached 75th webinar during COVID-19, and I've just passed over 10,000 participants as a way of giving back. So I'm really touched by the whole thing today. So thank you very much indeed. We'll just do a quick final survey and before we bring all the audience in. So just making sure we've got a final survey before we conclude. And the survey is, of course, we're just gonna share the survey now and get the panel to. So based on the presentation today and the panel discussion, would you be keen in getting involved or more involved in contract management? So for different projects. So again, if you can just please put your vote in. I found it really useful, of course. But based on the presentation today, would you get involved in more contract? Sometimes you need webinar like that to say, I want to do a master's in contract or construction dispute and law, things like that. So if I pick up the final word of wisdom, if I start from Avinash, part one, part two, very important in terms of pre-construction activities, and probably will invite you for the part three, which is the post-contract. What would your advice be as we conclude the year in such a turmoil and unprecedented year when it comes to contracts and pre-con, Avinash?
Couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, thank you, Vanita, for the presentation. Anil, thank you for calling me, and thanks all to all panelists around here. Lots of experience around the table. So in a nutshell, the new normal, as everybody calls it, is something that we're still learning and adapting to it. And of course, contract management and administration will surely change over the years. I think Vanita has touched base on part of the contract management part of it. There's of course a lot of processes involved into the management part of it. And of course, the administration part of it is something else when it comes to, of course, I'm talking as a contractor around here, but in general, it's the same thing. Some advice that I would like to give the guys out there. Yeah, we tend to be emotional about the administration part of the contract, but do be mindful that written communication is better than non-communication at all. And it's really important to track and timely identify performance problems when we go around the contract. And for the architects, I would not say only architects. There's one language that we speak on site, and it's drawings. And the clearer drawings are, the better the buildings are, and the less risk we deal with on a daily basis. So this is my word of advice to the guys. And I think part three will not be enough, Anita. We'll have to go much further down the line to go about the contract management and administration. But thank you a lot, Anil, for the opportunity. And thanks, guys, for being around you. A lot of experience around, and I feel very much pleased to be around you to be in this webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, and Avinash, I think you raised a good point. In part three, we'll allow more time for discussion, just like we had yesterday when we did the briefing. So Kim, before I finish off with Jay and Nirupa, Kim, again, what would be your advice to young architect coming in, as well as, practitioners, having been an engineer for so long and for having, giving back so much to the industry? What would your advice be, Kim, in terms of making sure we work collaboratively going forward?
I think young architects they are young, they are enthusiastic. I think they have a lot of things to give us as well, because we, as if you or the old school, if you want, we have our own way of doing things, and the new blood in the industry is always welcome. The thing is that nowadays you have got lots of tools for design and others, but this should not be forget that they are the primary team leaders for the design, and they should focus on the design coordination part of it, ensure that what the specification they want, as Jay rightly said, what the specification they want has to be incorporated in the documents. they have to have a clear follow-up and the quality level that they want to have in their project, and ensure that these are well incorporated in the documents. And this is where the route to, so they can't just focus onto the design, but the contract and the contract administration is also part of their job. And I think it's time for them to go and have a good grasp of it.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Vanita, just quickly from your side, again, thank you very much indeed for giving back. Thank you for part 1, part 2. Just quickly, what are we expecting in part 3 sometime next year?
I think sometime next year it will be a bit more on the actual management of the contract itself, like Avinash said, and it's quite interesting the point he's raised that I always look at it from a client point of view. I don't necessarily look at it from a contracting point of view, so it might be interesting to have a look at how to best present that in the next session. Yeah. But from my side, I would just hope this has been insightful for some of the young architects to make them understand how important the drawings and specifications are in putting into place that contract and in getting that building delivered successfully. Like Jay said, very often we see standard specifications being brought into the tender documents, in the contract documents, but it is very essential that each project is specific in its own right, and each project requires its own design and specifications. So it's an important part that they have to play. And I think the closing note from myself is just to thank the PAC, the MMA for having me on this webinar today. Thank you for the participants for coming for their time. And in this month of December, I wish you all and your families a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and a better 2022 for all of us.
And thank you, Vanita. Just quickly, before we get to the other two colleagues, Barinder, Dharam, and Divesh, and Xavier, can you just put your video on as well? Vanita, just quickly, in terms of the survey, percentage-wise, how do you think we fared as a team in terms of presentation? What
I have no idea, Anil. This is my first time after a very, very long time. So I think you're the expert. Oh, my Lord. Okay,
so here we go. A whopping 97%. Say this webinar has been super useful, and there's only 1% has said no. Maybe he or she is hungry and want to go for dinner. But as you can see, 97%. I think can we have a big round of applause, everyone? To really, it's such a. These are the webinar that really kind of kicks off. So thank you, Vanita and teams, to really get this going. Nirupa, just quickly. Few words of advice from you, few words of wisdom before we move with the team as we conclude, as we got to 2 hours and 15 minutes of CPD.
Yeah, I think much has been said today. Vanita's presentation was very comprehensive, lots of details, but I think for me, one of the key words today is buildability. It's so for the young architects, let's say it's not only a question of having nice designs, but it's a question of buildability, because our objective finally is to have a building, to have a finished product for the client. So I think buildability is, for me, really the one of the keywords that I retain today. And I take this opportunity to thank, this is my first webinar. Didn't feel quite comfortable at some times, to be frank with you. But I take this opportunity to thank everybody and wish everybody a nice end of year and better 2022, as Vanita said. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. J. And before I move to Xavier, and I think Kim want to say a few words, I think. But Mr. J, just quickly, obviously you initiated that CPD talk based on where young architect was really lacking in terms of some of the competencies. And I think what Vanita today is really clear out any issues and probably getting a bit more wisdom to all of us today. So Mr. J, a few words before I move to Dharam, Xavier, Divesh, and Barinder.
Yeah, I also would like to thank a lot, Vanita. Very insightful, I think clear, and I think young architects have really obtained a good grasp of FIDIC, and which I think they need to go into more details. But just to jump on one thing you said, Anil, earlier about the pandemic and so on. And you know, since the pandemic, we've been working from home. We architects, I mean engineers, structural engineers. We've even been coordinating from home with Zoom now. Thing which was not possible before is possible now, and we've been in coordination from home. But I think it's difficult for a contractor to work from home. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And so I think we need to have more respect for that. And this is my word of wisdom to my colleague architects, that we draw on paper, but they build on site.
Absolutely.
And during this pandemic, we are drawing from home, we are coordinating from home, but they are on site. And so it's important that we grasp these conditions of contract. And I've learned a lot from I was teamed with a South African architect in the G2 hospital. I've learned a lot from him. And one thing I've learned is we have to be a fair judge in our contract. Even though we are appointed by the client, we do not need to side always with the client. When the contractor is right, he's right. And he's got to be paid for whatever is due. So it's important that we pay respect to the contractor.
All right, thank you very much indeed. So lots of compassion, lots of love, lots of trust. Again, something we can develop in many of the webinars. So Devesh, a few words from you before I close the round with Barinder Xavier Durham. Few words as the president of MA on the webinar today.
Sure, great webinar. But one final thing I would like to say is that as architects, we think of ourselves, I mean, we are designers and artists, but I think it's crucial for us to grasp the legal aspect of the job as well, however painful it might be, because especially in today's circumstances where many projects are always fast-tracked and we run out of time to do thorough coordination and to produce the documents up to scratch as we should be doing. So, I mean, obviously that's the crucial message. And thank you, Vanita, and thank you, panelists and all the presenters. I think this was a great presentation. I think what I think would be a good idea when we meet again is perhaps go back to some of the key aspects that we've covered this evening, unpack those, and then move on to the third part that we haven't covered this evening.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devesh. Thank you very much indeed. Xavier, a few words from yourself before we conclude with Dharam and Barinder.
Yeah, I would like to thank Vanita for the presentation. That was very good. I would like to know if it is possible to get the slides of your presentation. I don't know if you're willing to share. I'm very happy about the attendance of the CPD. We've been working towards launching the CPD for 1 year now. And I think it's going well and we're on the right track. So I would like to thank all the attendees and looking forward to meet them for future CPDs next year. And thank you thank you to all the team, and thank you, Anil, as usual, for your cooperation and help.
All right, thank you, Xavier. Thank you very much indeed.
Just one thing, Jai, a contractor can work from home. All the precast elements you can do at home.
Are you introducing off-site construction? Dharam, just quickly, the new Vice Chairperson of PSC, a few words before we conclude with Barinder.
I'll count my words. It's going to be only very few. Thank you very much, Vanita, and please give us the date for the next one. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Dharam. Short and sweet there. Barinder, final word. You shared the video on YouTube, which was to do a project in Israel. You've been there. Unmute yourself and few words from yourself, Barinder, before we conclude this amazing webinar of 2 hours and 30 minutes. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I have just come back from a short trip to Israel. And I visited this construction site, and it was so inspiring that I thought I must share this with all the architects. You know, this building, it's a design which is very unique, I would say. I haven't seen anything like that before. And the great aspect about it is that you don't really realize that it's a building. You know, the building is like a covered vault, you could say, or a covered, you know, which has gardens on top of it. And the building actually is just under that. And it gives such a different feeling. It's really inspiring to look at that. And then when we were on site, we found that they had conditions, soil conditions that were not appropriate for construction of such a building, and they had to go for pile foundations. They've put in 1,500 piles, about 10 meters deep, 10 to 15 meters deep. And they had to construct the whole concrete slab on top of it at one go. And according to the planning, the trellis above is going to be in marble. And to construct that trellis, they'll have to do it one go. And that they'll have to pour concrete for 48 hours at one go. So that's really something. We'll see how that'll come out. So the construction is on, and I'd love to share what finally happens, how it comes out finally. So that's one from my visit to Israel. And otherwise, of course, thank you to Vanita. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the participants to be part of this webinar. And of course, Anil, who's the one who's organizing all this for us. I think all that we have gone through today has been very instructive and very precise, you know, very detailed and to the point. And all that we had to go through. I think Vanita prepared a really good presentation. It's like we could not leave an element out, because all these elements are really important in the construction documents. And this is the basis, this is our Bible when we go to the construction. And if something is missed out and something goes wrong in the contract document, that is when we know we are going to have problems on site. And it's going to be having an effect on the time factor. It's going to have an effect on your cost factor and the quality factor also. So I think it's really very important for everybody to understand the importance of contract documents. And as architects, maybe sometimes we limit ourselves to just doing the drawings and our specifications, and that's it. Mainly at the early stage, but it's important before the contract document is finalized that we know all aspects, all different clauses of the contract. You know, and mainly the particular conditions of contract and the appendix, what goes into it. So I think these are things which, as an architect, you really need to have your eye on. And once the construction starts, of course, then you can be more comfortable. You know that you have a contract where you have not left out any loopholes, and then you can work with the contractor with trust and confidence and collaboration. And then I just wanted to add one thing on what was being said about coordination, you know, with the different professionals, mainly the M&E engineers. I think it's like we were saying, it's important that at the very beginning of the design process, everybody is brought into the project. Like we go for an integrated design preparation. And now with BIM, it is so much possible, you know, to really coordinate our drawings and our design properly. So I would really encourage, or rather recommend that, you know, we involve the whole team from the very beginning as far as it's possible. And it really builds up that team spirit, you know, and that ownership of the project. You know, if everybody is in there from the beginning, then they will really take the responsibility for whatever has been done on the project. Sometimes you bring in the M&E in the end of the day and they say, you should have told me before, you know, and then, you know, you get all kinds of fictions. So let's move at it in the right direction, like we say. And thanks again, Vanita, for this presentation. And as we had already, you know, anticipated that we might need a second part to this, it might not be possible to finish everything today. So we will work towards that, and hopefully early next year, we'll have a second part.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much indeed, everyone. So don't forget to email me for a certificate attendance Of course, it was a remarkable webinar today based on the award and the PSC 001, Alistair, Zulfi, and Dave as well. So it's been really humbling to witness the whole entire webinar today, as well as the panelists and Vanita's presentation. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thank you to all of you. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, and really be safe and stay away from, and make sure you put your mask on. So on this note, and I think there's so many more webinars we can do. I'm so excited about the whole thing. So have a great evening, and thank you very much indeed. I don't want to go. I want to stay here for the next hour or so, but I have to go because my wife is searching for me. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next year. Can I just a big wave from all the panelists, please, and the speaker, big wave, and thank you very much indeed. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.